So, Lisa, tell us about the effects of secondhand drinking on the rest of us, on those of us who aren't the drinking.
So when you're coping with a loved one's drinking behaviors, and that can be verbal, physical, emotional abuse, neglect, it could be being very loving when drinking and then not the next day. It's these behaviors that just aren't the typical of the person. And they're caused when the ethyl alcohol chemical in the alcoholic beverage changes the way brain cells talk to one another. So when that happens and we think it's the real person coming out, we tend to engage as if there's something we can do to affect a different conversation or a different outcome. And when somebody's brain is changed by these chemicals, you can't. So what that does when it's repeated over and over and over, it's triggering our stress response. Yes. And then what happens is the stress, when it's happening over and over, plus it's happening throughout our day with things like COVID, hitting that stress response as well. So it becomes toxic. And then toxic stress causes anxiety, depression, migraines, stomach problems, sleep problems, heart disease, inflammatory disease. It's incredible what toxic stress does. And so when we see these symptoms and we say, oh gosh, ask that question, does somebody's behaviors in your life change when they drink or use other drugs? If you're adding drugs to this conversation, yes. When they say yes, then you can start to go, okay, so what's that about? And get at the real problem.
Yes, because from my experience, the stress tends to pile up. Like it's an additional stress on top of work responsibilities, parenting, just the daily obligations we have. And we're struggling and we're wondering, why is this person causing me to struggle so much more? We don't understand. That's not their intent.
Right.
That's just how it's working on their brain.
Exactly. And when somebody's drinking has moved up the line from use to abuse to alcoholism, then you throw in brain wiring and changes around the risk factors, which yes. are genetics, social environment, early use, mental health, childhood trauma, as well as the characteristics, and that's cravings, tolerance, physical dependence, and loss of control. So that whole mix in this one little brain
yes.
really has a significant impact on the way that person thinks and what they do. And so when we don't understand the disease itself or alcohol use disorders in general,
yes,
we tend to be going after the wrong problem instead of like, okay, this has an effect on me. What am I going to do to protect myself? And it doesn't mean you have to leave or that, but what am I going to do differently? Because this isn't working. I'm getting sick.
Yes. And becoming aware, whether you choose a 12-step group or something, because as it's a progressive disease yes. or a condition, and then denial is their denial. And if we join in that denial, it's just a compounded problem, but their denial is happening in their brain and we're rationalizing.
Right. And and we don't want to call them an alcoholic. So we kind of buy in at some level. Okay, well then you only promise to drink on Fridays or only promise to drink on holidays and then they can't hold that promise because of the characteristics, the brain wiring, that then they fail and you're upset that they failed and they're upset, they're shamed, they're feeling really badly too. But the whole system, the family system stays pretty stuck.
It stays pretty stuck. And then we move on to not being able to go to work, financial disruption, possible car accidents,
yes,
and blaming everybody, not taking responsibility or accountability. And that actually becomes part of our behavior too,
It does,
to some extent.
If they just stopped, everything would be fine.
Yes, exactly. So we start buying into when they stop going to work half of the time. Oh, my boss is on my back, and we go, "Oh, poor you. Your boss is." That's why I have to come over and have a drink after work, and we start buying in sometime until we become aware. So and now my big question, because it took me a long time. And when I first reached out to you, this is where I was, is how do we come to recognize our part, not theirs? Because victim blaming and feeling like the victim is real easy at first.
Yes.
Even though it doesn't solve a problem. But how do people come to recognize what's going on with them, not with the drinker?
So some of the physical ways you can do it is, are you experiencing headaches? Are you experiencing anxiety? Do you find yourself doing because you're trying to fix kind of thing? Are you worried all the time? Do you just not enjoy the things you used to do? Are you really focused mostly on them, or focused on the others in the family so that they don't trigger them to use, or if they're using or drinking, then to get them out of the way? All that outward focus and then the physical experiences of toxic stress are a good way to go, yeah, I am. And a lot of times we'll go to the doctor. I know it myself, and I was diagnosed with situational depression and then put on Zoloft, and then that didn't work so well, and then put on Prozac, and that really didn't fix what was really underneath, which was these behaviors that I was trying to control, not understanding I had no control. And that's the thing about, for me, was finally understanding that it is a brain disease or a brain disorder. So just as by definition, when cells are changed in a body organ, so disease by simplest definition is a change in the cell health. And when cells are changed in a body organ, they change that organ's health. So we all go, okay, lung cancer cells in the lung cancer, accepted. But this is to change cells in the brain, and we don't, we have a hard time buying that this is a brain disease. But understanding why it is and what goes into causing it to be a disease helps us appreciate, wow, until they take that chemical out, there is no change.
Right. There's no change. So we have to change ourselves, our response to it, instead of a reaction to it.
Absolutely.
That's and one of the first things I'm glad I did do was discuss with my doctor when my blood pressure got high and we couldn't bring it down, and my weight ballooned and we couldn't figure out why. And I don't know, somehow within me, I just decided to tell her what was going on at home.
Yes.
And it's very important to speak to your medical professional about that.
And you're absolutely right, because those are two outcomes. So the stress response is designed to create the physiological changes to fight or run, which was about the only danger early man faced. So that means it's amping up the heart rate to send blood out to the muscles. It constricts blood vessels to the skin so we don't bleed out, but that's like our headaches and our mind fog, and obesity, because it shuts down the digestive system to conserve glucose. Well, when we're under stress, we're just really messing with our digestive system.
Yes.
So to your point, it's these physical things that we keep pointing to and saying, well, give me medication for that, or, go on a diet. Until you get rid of the stress, it's going to be really hard.
It's really hard. We couldn't figure out why I was working out with a trainer and not an ounce was falling off.
This is not fair.
And the doctor, I felt like the doctor didn't believe me. Until I told her what was going on at home. And they said, oh, okay. And she worked with me right to the end. So yes.
Wow, that's fantastic. You had a doctor like that.
Oh, it really is. She had empathy. She checked on, when emergencies came up at home, I could call her. She gave me her cell phone number. It was amazing. She was just wonderful. She really was. Yes,
Wow,
she
that's
really
unusual.
was. And she really kept monitoring me. And I just lost her recently. She moved to a different practice.
Oh,
to
gosh,
a
how wonderful.
really, but it was right. She took my husband on too, and so she knew everything already. So that was great. That was great.
Did your husband, was he able to
It
get
was it
control?
was too late at that point. Yeah,
Okay.
it was
Yeah,
kind of too late. So, but she kind of was supporting me through it. That's what she was
yeah,
doing.
that's
So that's
wonderful.
one. So you just explained also people, and we've all done it. We try to talk rationally to an irrational brain, and then we get frustrated when nothing changes. When someone goes to rehab, we expect miracle. We have expectations that aren't realistic. We
True.
expect, and explain also why rehab and rehabilitation for an alcoholic or addict is a lifetime. So relapse, we should not take personally either.
Correct. Yes. And, during this time of COVID, especially with the lockdown portions of it, there was been a lot of relapse people contacting me about that happening in their home. And you're right, it's just now their stress response has been hammered, and
Yes.
their brain likely mapped the soother as being alcohol or other drugs, and so it's a bam, it's like that fast that it activates those maps, and then you're using before you know it, kind of thing. And you think, well, okay, I haven't had it for 3 years, I can cope with it this time. But it's like riding a bike. It goes back in and kicks those old brain maps, and you're back to
Square one.
Yep. Mm-hmm. The way to treat substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder, or an alcoholism problem is to understand, well, gosh, a couple things. To understand low risk limits so that we know the benchmark.
Okay.
And so for women, low risk limits is 7 standard drinks in a week, no more than 3 on any day of those 7. And then for men, it's 14 standard drinks with no more than 4 on any day of those
Wow.
14. So understanding a standard drink is 5 ounces of table wine, a 12-ounce regular beer, and a 1.5-ounce shot of hard, 80 proof spirits. So that's kind of quote unquote normal. Now, when somebody starts to go up from that, that's typically when the behavioral changes are. They're still not in alcoholism. They're likely in alcohol abuse. Maybe on the weekends they drink a couple 6-packs or have a bottle of wine or something like that. But they're still not crossed that line into alcoholism. So in the alcohol abuse stage, you can start to look at why you're drinking and make the commitment to bring your drinking back into low risk limits, and eventually perhaps turn to low risk limits, or ultimately stop if that's what you want to do. Understanding it's always that chemical. So every standard drinks means the amount of ethyl alcohol chemical in that container and type of alcohol is the same. So it's the ethyl alcohol that's changing brain function.
People don't necessarily measure. I mean, unfortunately, people don't pay attention to how much they're drinking. That's kind of how they slip into trouble, right?
Right. And a lot of times, so for the family member or whomever is with that person, you can measure. You can look at their typical glass of wine, pour that into a measuring cup and go, oh my gosh, it's 10 ounces every night. And they're having 3 of those. Well, that's 6 standard drinks. So then okay, there's no even point here, even though they think they've just had a couple.
Okay. And then
that's the way for you to monitor at this point. There's no point in having these conversations.
Right. Now, we also have to monitor ourselves with how much socializing we're doing with them also, and that we have to keep ourselves in check.
Yes. I mean, that's definitely, because, right. And then when they get into this abuse stage, then the brain is now more vulnerable to the risk factors for why you develop alcoholism. And those are genetics. That's a big part of it. You can have a genetic component. Not that there's an alcoholism gene, but there are differences that contribute to why one brain crosses into alcoholism and another doesn't. Mm-hmm. Early use. So drinking during the teen years before 21, that's one of the biggest reasons.
Yes.
Social environment. So if you're in a calm, loving environment, early on, your brain will go together one way and then might not be as vulnerable. But if it's in a turbulent environment, then your brain goes together in a stress way and it's vulnerable because the alcohol chemical works on pleasure pathways and makes you feel good. And then there's childhood trauma, and then lastly, mental illness. So a lot of times people will have both a mental illness like anxiety or depression or bipolar or PTSD, and they drink to soothe it, or vice versa. So it's like having two diseases in one body, and you have to treat them both at the same time. Kind of like if you had cancer and diabetes, they never say we're going to quit treating the diabetes while we treat the cancer. They do them both. So those risk factors then make somebody vulnerable to cross the line into third level, which is alcoholism, and that is the brain disease. And the basis of that treatment is you got to get the chemical out, period, and never use it again. Because the brain has this mapping process around where we spend our time in our brain. And so it's that riding the bike idea. Treating alcoholism is like any other chronic disease, because it is chronic and that relapse, as you were saying, is possible and often likely. I mean, not often, but it can be.
Yes.
Takes detox stabilization, that's stage one, just like they do for heart disease.
It has to be medical, right?
Medical, absolutely.
Because, to my shock and awe, I found out that it can't be, if it's cold turkey, it can lead instantly to death.
Right. Because when you've been drinking that heavily, that alcohol can only get out through the liver. And so all body organs are affected typically. So when you just suddenly yank it out, now the body's in, just like the brain wants it, the body wants it. And to your point, then that's right, can be. And then the acute care is what typically like a rehab stint might be. And then long-term care. So just as treating cancer, it takes about 5 years before they call you cancer-free or in remission. Same thing with treating alcoholism or other drug addictions. So you need at least 90 days in that acute care rehab phase. And then about a year is a good solid, okay, this brain is on track. And then you just keep practicing your new behaviors. So the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, has a wonderful site called Principles of Effective Treatment.
Okay.
So listeners can go to that, Principles of Effective Treatment from NIDA, and they will find what it takes to treat this disease. For some people, a 12-step program works great. But for people who have like a co-occurring mental illness,
right,
you got to treat that mental illness, and a 12-step program can't.
Right. There's a dual diagnosis component. So this podcast is geared more to the secondhand drinker.
Yes.
So what is their recovery look like? What do they need? Where do they start? First of all, they have to shed the fear. There's a fear of your loved one dying, so that's the first stressor, I would say.
Yes.
And then the chaos that they bring to your home or whatever. So where do they start, and what steps can they take?
Really good question, since we really should be focusing on them. But so my 10th anniversary edition. So the first book of that title, If You Love Me, You'd Stop, was done in 2008-09. Okay. And that was when they were just starting to, they being the National Institutes of Health on Drug Abuse and the National Institutes of Health on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, the idea that this was a brain disease. It had been referred to as a disease, but why it was a brain disease starts coming out then. And I was like, oh my gosh, we got to know this. But now here we are 10 years later, and that's what the 10th anniversary, it's all the latest research, and it's all very friendly, easy to read.
Yes,
you said that first.
Yes, I have the new one too.
Okay, so it's the same tone, and science is not like sciencey, it's more just here. So the first thing is to understand the disease itself, because that starts to take away some of the anger and the frustration and the blame and the shame at the person with the disorder.
Okay.
And then the second half of the book is all about how to help yourself.
Okay.
So what some of the things that can help are going to, like an Al-Anon program for the peer support. It can cognitive behavioral therapy or some of these therapies that help you unwire that stress response, because your stress response is running throughout the day, not just on your loved one's use, but like you were saying earlier, jobs, finances, children,
yes,
yada, yada, yada. So how do we calm this stress response? And there's so many practical tools and suggestions in that section. So first half is understand the disease, and then the second half is how do you help yourself?
Okay, so in understanding the disease is when we let go of thinking that love is just enough.
Exactly.
And that's a weight off. That's a weight off to just let go of the responsibility. Didn't cause it, can't cure it, can't change it.
Can control it, right. And that's exactly it. Because then we can also, in time, forgive. Because when we see, oh my gosh, they had childhood trauma, they had the genetic predisposition, the things they didn't understand and how they developed the disease.
Okay.
So we both were doing the best we could with what we knew at the time, which was zero.
Yes, and we can develop some empathy and compassion and for ourselves too. That's very important. Okay, yes, I was doing a lot of things wrong, but I didn't know any better.
And that's exactly right. You can forgive yourself for what you did to stay safe.
Yes.
Because you were just trying to stay safe in chaos that you didn't know was uncontrollable by you.
Yes. So, Lisa, this has been so informative, as I knew it would be. And, we have to do this again at some point. Mm-hmm. And also I'll have my links to my Butterfly Effect program for peer support coaching for codependents. And we'll try to help get you to that second area of forgiveness and self-compassion, self-care, self-healing. We thank you so much for joining us today. I know this has been helpful for all of those going through secondhand drinking, and we will be back for the next episode in 2 weeks. Thank you for joining us in the Butterfly Effect. Thank you. Bye-bye.